What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. Today we've got Chris Cardone, who I met, was one of the very first times I went to New York in 2007. And it was back in my flair days, and I went and did a cocktail competition, and we had a lot of fun in New York. And so I'm really looking forward to chatting about his new direction and what he's planning on going on with the future. So I'd like to introduce Chris Cardone. How are you, buddy?
I'm great. How are you?
Good, man. Good. Thank you so much for your time. Let's kick it straight off. I always start off with give your backstory, your origin story to how you got into the industry.
Yeah. All right. This obviously goes back a little bit. So I was sitting in my apartment in college in Pennsylvania, and it was like a random Monday or Tuesday night, and flipping through the channels, and I saw the movie Cocktail was on, and I had never seen it. And so, I put it on, I start watching it, and I finished it, and I remember thinking to myself, man, like those guys were cool. Like I want to be those guys, right? And so I was finishing up my junior year at college, and I think I watched it maybe 3 or 4 weeks before we were done with finals. And I got home and I immediately went online and I was looking for bartending schools. I found one that was maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes from my place. It was called the Bartenders Academy of New York. And I went in on Monday. I paid right then and there. I think it was like 200 or 250 bucks, something like that. And it was 40 hours. It was 9 to 5 and Monday through Friday. And I loved it. And, granted, looking back now, almost 25 years ago, it was kind of nonsense, and stuff like that. But it started me, and so I ended up the day after, I guess the last day on Friday, we finished. I went with the graduating class across the street to a bar called the Roadhouse. And a friend of mine from high school was bartending there. And so we were like, oh my God, I haven't seen you. How you been? And I told her, I said, yeah, I just graduated from the school across the street and, I'm going to try to bartend. And she said, the owner's right at the end of the bar and we're looking for someone to work Monday nights. Do you want me to introduce you? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I walked over to him and he was like, yeah, he kind of was like, if you want Mondays, you can have them. He kind of flipped it up. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it. And that's how it started,
So you did start out in flair, correct? Yeah.
I
That's
did.
when
Yeah.
we met.
Yeah. So after that I didn't do any flair that first summer. And then after I went back to college, I was, kind of playing online and I found this thing called the Flair Bartenders Association. And there was this is going to be funny to say this out loud, but there was a VHS tape that you could order. And if you're listening to this podcast and you don't know what a VHS tape is, ask your grandfather. And so I ordered it and I got it and I would watch these legends now, and now a lot of them are in the mixology world, but they were there flipping bottles and, it was incredible. It was kind of maybe 5 or 6 minutes of them just kind of free flowing, doing stuff till AC/DC and Metallica and all these hard, heavy metal kind of music. And I remember just being mesmerized by it. And there wasn't a lot, back then YouTube didn't exist or anything like that. So this was the only kind of outlet I had to seeing what was happening. So I was just copycatting their stuff, oh, they dropped a bottle behind your back. Okay, I'm going to do that. And, at the time, Flair bottle didn't even exist. So I would wrap glass bottles in duct tape just to practice with them so that they didn't break or, cut me. And so I was, it was maybe April or no. Yeah, it was April or May. And I was online, at this time in college, there was computer rooms. So, I'm in the computer room and I'm looking on the FBA website and I see that there's an international competition in the Cayman Islands. And I was 20, I was about to become 21 and I had never left the country. So my parents weren't really travelers. So I never left. And I was like, oh my God, what a cool opportunity this would be. And so I remember calling my mom and dad on a Sunday night and being like, I'm going to the Cayman Islands. And they're like, wait, what? And so I went down and I was, at the time it was really funny because I started watching these guys flipping on the beach being like, holy shit, what am I doing here? Right. I don't belong here. But at the same time, they started coming over and they were like, oh, you're competing. Where are you from? Let me see what you got. And I would do stuff and they'd be like, no, this is what you have to do. This is why you're not hitting it. And it was so fraternal and it was such a good group of people that I was just sucked in. And that was it. Flair for the next, 5, 6, 7 years only.
So as you mentioned, a lot of the guys from the flair tending world, going back to VHS tapes, I remember when I first started chatting with Dean Senils, I was like, I had your VHS tapes in Australia, that's where like in my living room, again, wrap bottles, that sort of thing. Like it was crazy. VHS tapes.
It was.
But you were mentioning how a lot of the big names now have moved into mixology. What was the clicker for you to move from the flair world? Because to be honest, until like maybe 10 years ago, there was a very distinct, like, you're either a flair dude or you're a cocktail person. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like you're either a flair person or a cocktail person. That's it. What
yeah,
made you do the
100%.
evolution?
Yeah, so we met at the Big Apple Showdown in New York.
Yep.
So the first year that we ran that, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think it was '05. And it could have been '06. It's, you know how it is, it gets fuzzy, but it was one of those years. And Mike McLean and Dean and I organized it together, the three of us. And Mike said, "Hey, we're going to go check out this bar. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course. You know, let's go out, let's catch up." And so I was like, "What's it called?" And they said, "It's called Milk and Honey." And I had never heard of it. And I was like, "Okay, whatever." And so we went, I so vividly remember this. Like the three of us, we got out of the cab, we went up to this door, you know, there's no sign or anything. And we had to call and tell them that we were there. And they opened the door and all you see is a black curtain. We open up the curtain and there's this little tiny spot, right? All brick and candlelit and jazz is on. And you're like walking into the 1920s. And I'm looking around. I'm like, what is this? And there's this random guy behind the bar and he's, you know, shaking real hard. And you can hear a difference in the shake because the ice is different. Cold draft was just starting, right? And we sit down and he's, you know, introduces himself. He's like, "Hey, I'm Sasha. You know, this is my place. And what do you guys drink?" There's no menu. And we're all like, you know, and like none of us really knew what to do. And he kind of helped us like not feel stupid about it and walked us through it. And he was like, you know, like, "This is, I think I'm going to make this for you. And I think you'll really like it." It was all cash. And I think we each had like 2 cocktails. And I remember walking out of there being like, this is going to be the future. Like it was so clear to me. And then I went home and like right away, I started looking up books and I got Dale DeGroff's and I got Gary Reagan's. And that was kind of like, those are like my little Bibles, you know, I would bring them to work with me and be like, you know, flipping through pages, trying to figure out what cocktail I was going to make, you know, the regular that came in at, you know, at the bar I was working at. And I was so sucked in that I was just all in. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall because at the time, you know, it was like Flair was here in mixology, which was just starting. And it kind of did this for a little while. And then it went like that real fast. And so I remember as soon as I left, I started looking up other places and the Flatiron Lounge had just opened. Pegu had just opened. So I went and checked those out. And again, just so blown away by what they were doing. Flatiron was so freaking cool when you walked into that like tunnel to walk in. And like just the feel of it and the cocktails and the bartenders were just grinding and pounding through these really high level drinks. And then Pegu, I remember sitting at the table and getting a little, you know, like, I don't even know what you call it, like a little caddy of Simple and Lemon and being like, what? And like the idea that you could like balance your cocktail table side yourself was like, and then when I went to employees only, and this is when the back room was open, the garden. And so I know a lot of people that have never even knew that the garden existed because they had to shut it down so fast. But I remember going in there and it was so gorgeous because you could see up and out and like there were like vines up on the ceiling. And it was just, like I said, it just like right away it got me. And I was like, I need to work on this. This is going to be something big. And so I reached out to a mutual friend of ours, Tobin Ellis, and emailed him and said, you know, talk to me. What do I got to do here? Like, how do I get in here? And he was awesome. You know, he sent me this, you know how Tobin is with writing. He sent me an email and it was like this and this, like bullet pointed emails about what to do to get better and who to reach out to and what to look at and websites and books. And I mean, you name it. And then that was like 2008-9 when I was really starting to get into it. He was instrumental in introducing me to Julie Reiner. And then Julie had just opened up Lani Kai. And so that I got in there. That was the beginning of the mixology journey for the next, 15 years.
And then what year did you do Diageo World Class?
So I started I submitted in 13 and I didn't get in. And then, I got that like rejection letter that everyone hates getting, right? Where it's like, thank you so much for submitting it. Unfortunately, your cocktail sucks. And
Yeah.
so, like that kind of thing. So I didn't get in. And then the next year in 14, I submitted again and I got in and I went up to the regionals in Boston. And I remember the room when I got there. I was so freaking intimidated. It was like the heaviest hitters you could imagine. I mean, people that have gone on to open up bars and consulting companies, and like every person in that room has become something monstrous in the industry. And I remember looking around and seeing like Steve Schneider and Giuseppe Gonzalez and Ezra Starr, Chris Lauder, and being like, I don't belong here at all. And Tyson Bueller was there. And like, I'm just like, they're popping in my head as I'm talking. And I remember feeling so out of my league because I didn't like really practice or do anything. I just had like basic ideas for some drinks and some basic ideas for talking about them. And I remember kind of doing my rounds and thinking like, okay, that went okay. Like that felt good. And then when I got through the regionals, I was like, my first initial reaction was like, did they make a mistake? Like maybe they need to check the scores or they read the wrong name, like Steve Harvey. Right. And so after I got in, I remember talking to the judges afterwards, and all of them said the same thing. They said, you were just bartending. Everyone else was, tight, and you were just like laughing, being stupid, bartending. And I kind of took that with me. And then in the finals, I got to follow Charles Joly on every round. And that group, again, was monstrous names in the industry in 14 doing that. And I felt like besides Julio Cabrera, I think everyone else in the room was thinking about who was going to come in second, right? Like everyone kind of knew Charles Joly was going to win, except Julio. I think Julio felt like he was on the same level because Julio literally went and won Sapphire's Most Imaginative like a month after that. And he went, and he got his direction from that. But they were like this. And then everyone else was just like, I hope I take second. I hope I can get third. And so again, super loose about it, just kind of like, I don't belong here. And again, I got the same exact reaction. I ended up taking fifth that year, and everyone said the same thing. They were like, you were so just happy and bartending and like playing with house money, right? There was no stress. There was no like, tight energy. And then 15 came in real ego driven, a lot of hubris, thinking I was just going to walk through the regionals. And I shit the bed so bad. One of my Ricky Gomez was one of the judges. And I was like, I blacked out my round. Like, I don't remember what I was talking about. And I think I credited a cocktail to the wrong person. Like I was a mess and just, crash and burn. So the next year in 16, came back, felt, practiced, worked hard, really researched everything, got through regionals, got to the nationals. And I thought I won. I like all my rounds went perfect and I was really, really comfortable with it. And then they announced Andrew Meltzer and I was like, what happened? And then I remember reaching out to all the judges afterwards being like, tell me the bad, don't tell me any good. Just tell me all the bad. Tell me what I need to work on to get over this hump. And all of them kind of gave me really, really tough, hard, constructive criticism that I for the first time probably opened up and listened to, like really accepted it and worked on all of that for a year. And then in 17, I finally broke through and won.
Nice. Do you think that that constructive criticism, more competitors need to reach out to judges? Because I know a lot of competitors from being involved with World Class here in Canada, like sometimes are just like, okay, didn't make it. It is what it is, but they never reach out and say, hey, what did I do? What did I screw up?
Yeah, I think, as somebody who's judged flair comps and now cocktail comps for so many years, I always say to competitors when they ask me, like, what happens a lot of times is people will ask you the night of the finals. They'll come up to you after they've had like 18 drinks and be like, hey, what do I got to do? Like, this is not the time or place, like, don't do this right now. Let's do this tomorrow or the next day when you're like right in the right frame of mind. So I always tell people that when you compete in a competition, whatever that competition is, there's generally speaking, in my opinion, there are two ways to do this. You either compete to show what you want to show, or you compete to win. And those are not mutually exclusive things. So competing to win, I think, is where you take feedback and you grow from it and you learn from it so that you can do better the next time. While competing to show what you want to show is more about just doing whatever you want to do and not really caring what the result of that is. And I think those are two very different mindsets.
So with this, the continuous beverage sort of pivot, how did
Yeah.
you pivot's such a bad word now since the pandemic. Pivot is such a bad word since the pandemic.
It's a
How did
terrible word.
how did the wellness track sort of happen? Where did that sort of come about?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually, the idea and the journey of it started in 17 when I won world class. So I stopped drinking in 15. I got to a point where I said I needed to kind of like reevaluate where I was drinking wise. And
Mhm.
so I took a year off. I planned on taking a year off and I was just going to take that break. And then I got to about 9 months and I realized that every single part of my life was getting better and I didn't miss drinking. Because for me, and obviously everybody has a different relationship with alcohol, but for me, I am not capable of having a drink or two
Mhm.
drinks and calling it a night. And there are so many people out there that can. You know, they go out, they have a glass of wine, they have a beer, whatever, and they go home. Or they even, some people even will have two or three and go home. And that's their night. And they don't wake up
Mhm.
with blackouts. They don't wake up with hangovers. They don't wake up with the dread of worrying about what they said or who they pissed off or all of those feelings that I was having on a nightly basis. And I always like to use the analogy of a whirlwind because the beverage industry, right? We all tend to go to work in whatever fashion, right? Whether you're a server, a bartender, a brand ambassador, whatever that looks like for you, a lot of us tend to go out the night of, have our good time with our friends, and it is genuinely a good time. But
Mhm.
we go overboard, and the next day we wake up, we feel like shit. We kind of push through the day as best we can until the night, and then we do it all over again. And it sort of becomes a cycle. So I always say it's like a whirlwind because you get caught and it's hard to get out of it
Mm.
because you just keep doing it. So I was doing it like 5-6 nights a week where I was like borderline blacking out every night. And then the next day, just being like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then just doing it again because it just becomes second nature. And so I got to a place where I said, let me take a break. Let me see what it feels like, because I had always done dry months. I'd done dry
Mm.
December where I wouldn't drink for a month. And I kind of convinced myself that if I could go 31 days in December, I don't have a drinking problem. I just like to drink. And
Mhm.
so getting through that first month is kind of, I don't want to say it's easy because it's not easy, but it was easy for me to go 31 days because I think I had the knowledge that the next day I could drink again. So I didn't
Mm.
feel like immense pressure. When people try to quit drinking, they put so much pressure on themselves where they're like, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. And if they go out one time and have a drink, it feels like the weight of the world came crashing down
Mm.
and they're a failure and they couldn't do it. And that pressure is so heavy. So I just took that month as like sort of like my way of showing myself or almost deluding myself to think that I could do this. So when I said I was going to take a year off, a couple people actually said to me like, I don't think you can do that. Like, that's not who
Wow.
you are. And it bothered me because I kind of agreed with them. I said, I kind of feel that way too. So now I really was motivated to do it. And like I said, I got to 9 months and I said, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like everything's better. Like I have a better relationship with my kids. I have a better relationship with myself. I have a better relationship with my coworkers. Everything was getting better. So like the value of drinking versus not drinking for me was like really skewed to the not drinking thing. And so anyway, getting back to your question, I didn't really say anything in 15, 16 because I was kind of figuring myself out and figuring out what I was doing. But when I got to 17 and I won world class, I felt like I sort of had it put together a little bit better. And I felt like I had a platform for the first time because I'm not like a big social media person. It's sort of never, I'm trying now, but it's never been my thing. And so I've kind of always been a little bit more of like a kind of like keep it to myself, more intimate conversations and that kind of thing. So I never really felt like I had a platform, but all of a sudden with world class, I felt like I did. And so I started talking about it publicly about sobriety and like, all of us kind of taking a minute to realize that we're sucked in this industry where it can get out of hand really easily. And we should all kind of take a step back and kind of get a feeling for, I always say like, does your the way the relationship you have with alcohol, does it align with what you want it to be? Because those are two different things a lot. And you have to make sure that if you're saying, okay, I like to go out and have a drink or two sometimes, and I have a healthy relationship, is your behavior aligning with that? If it is, you probably have no problem. But if it's not, and you're saying, like, I like to go out and have a drink or two, and every time you go out, you're having 8 and waking up in a mess, that's not aligned. So I was kind of saying, like, everybody, like, let's all take a minute, because sobriety is kind of like veganism, where once you do it, you kind of like want to scream it out to the world and be like, hey, I figured it out. I want to tell you all about it. And I got a lot of pushback. And I got some emails and some text messages from people that I really, really cared about, that I felt like were mentors of mine, that I felt like I kind of like loved, and saying, like, listen, like, shut up, like, we don't want to hear this, and like, get off your soapbox, like, you're not Mr. High Horse, like, shut up. And it really bothered me. And it got to the point where I just zipped it up, and I said, all right, like, maybe I'm not doing good. Like, my intention was to do good, but maybe I'm bothering people and hurting people more than I was trying to. So I shut up. And I've had, for the past 5-6 years, multiple people email me saying, hey, listen, like, I know you're sober. I know you're in the industry. Can you help me? Because I'm trying to figure this out. And I've kind of privately, I don't want to use the word coached, because everyone says they're a coach now, but I've kind of privately coached people through what they're trying to figure out, right? Because my push has never been, you got to be sober. It's, you got to figure out what works for you. And so, I told people, I'm like, let's figure this out together. Talk to me about what you're feeling. Talk to me about what you're doing. But I've always kept it really private, because A, it's none one else's business, right? And second of all, if they're reaching out to me, then I'm not going to tell anybody about it. It's kind of like confidential, where I'm just trying to be a friend to somebody. But about a year ago, I started looking around, and I was like, 2024 is a very different place than 2017 was. I mean, it's like black and white different. That 2017, maybe one non-alcoholic product on the market, maybe. And
now
so
hundreds,
so
much.
And the difference is that now they're actually good. And so, you have sober podcasts, and you have sobriety coaches, and it's just not the same sort of like shame that's put on people anymore about like questioning their sobriety. The word sober curious didn't exist, like all of this stuff. So I kind of said, let me try again, and let me see what happens. And again, my goal of creating this company is to sort of 2 prongs. One is to restaurant or bar consult, in that there is so much opportunity for growth and education in the non-alcohol or the low ABV space, because low ABV is just like the NA space. There's very little knowledge about it, and there's so much growth potential. And so for me, trying to teach people, bars and bartenders and staff, as well as the public, about the value of this, because like I still work at a restaurant 2 nights a week. I work at Isodi. I love my job. It's incredible. And so even there, over the past couple of years, we've seen an increase in the people who come in that don't drink. And so from a business standpoint, there's so much lost opportunity if you don't have something for them to have. Speaking from personal experience, when you sit down at a table, if there's no option, you have a water. And that means you're not spending any money. And so from the perspective of the owner of the restaurant, the managers, and the staff, you want people spending money. You want to bring in income. You want to bring in revenue. You want to make sure that the servers are making their, 20% on a larger check average. So there's value there. So consulting in that aspect for sure. But then the other part of it is doing brand advocacy work and kind of creating events that can sort of inspire people to live healthier lifestyles, but again, making their own decision. So I launched my company last Wednesday night in Soho on a rooftop. And what was so cool about it, I want to say maybe we had about 60 people come. And what was so cool was that I did a menu where there were 2 no alcohol cocktails and 2 low ABV cocktails. And, the sponsors, it was Forged Gin and Liars and Aperol and Seedlip and, on and on. And what was so cool about it was that we had a non-alcoholic Peroni, like Peroni beer, non-alcoholic. We had Toast wine, which is non-alcoholic wine. And then we had an alcoholic beer and a non-alcoholic beer. And a non-alcoholic beer and an alcoholic beer, a non-alcoholic wine and alcoholic wine, and then cocktails with both booze and no booze. And what was so cool was that if you were like, Chris, I'll give you $1 gajillion right now if you tell me which people at the party were drinking and who weren't, I couldn't do it. And that's what was so cool, because everyone had something in their hand, including myself, for the full time they were there. but I couldn't tell you who was drinking and who was not drinking. And that's the goal, is to make sure that, like, my thing is, like, everyone deserves a seat at the bar.
Do you think, going back to those emails you were getting, do you think as an industry, obviously you said pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, very, very different. We're definitely more accepting on sobriety and guests. Do you still think the industry doesn't like their demons being called out publicly? Like, as you said, like a lot of the conversations you have is private. A lot of people do suffer in silence, and like we've all got those friends that you're like, like we should be chatting about your consumption levels, really.
For sure.
Do you think that the industry is opening up a little bit more now? I like, as someone's going to have an open conversation at a party or something like that about it?
No, I don't think, well, here's the thing. Like, I don't think we as a society are good about talking about our shit. Like, I just think that's just human nature. I don't think people are like, love the idea of being public about I don't even want to say their shortcomings, because it's such a sensitive subject for people, where some people are like, listen, like, that's just what I want to do. I want to go out and I want to drink hard and I want to have a nice time. And I don't think I have a problem with it. And the people around me aren't telling me I have a problem with it. So, I don't care. And again, that's the thing is like, everyone has a different relationship. So it's hard to say, you shouldn't be drinking this much, or you should be drinking. Like, there's no one size fits all here, and everyone's different, in their relationship. So I don't think anyone wants to be like, hey, I'm at a party, let me talk about it. Like, I think people like myself who are public about it are definitely the rarer of the group. However, what I will say is I do think the industry has grown massively, because I remember when in 17, 16, when I was telling people that I was sober and still working in the industry, there were a lot of people like in the industry being like, I don't think you can do that. Like, you're going to have to switch industries. And that was a huge insecurity of mine when I was making the choice. The choice to not drink was that, shit, am I going to have to leave this industry? Like, am I going to have to do something else? I remember brand ambassadors publicly on Facebook and stuff saying, like, you can't be a brand ambassador and not drink the product. Like, that's not authentic. I remember having that conversation and being like, that's not true. Like, you can certainly figure out a way to make this work. Like, for example, like, I still taste and spit cocktails. So when I judge world class, I'm still putting alcohol in my mouth. I'm spitting it out. My relationship with alcohol was that, because I committed to being in this industry and said, I'm not leaving it, I figured out that I could compartmentalize, where I can understand the science of tasting a cocktail to break it down for balance and flavor, and not think of it as a social aspect. My problems always came with social drinking. So I removed that completely, and I only taste and spit cocktails when I'm trying to scientifically break it down. And so that's always worked for me.
Yeah, I think sometimes when I have friends go, okay, well, I'm going to go judge a spirit competition or something like that. Like, how do you do that? It's like, well, it's a job. Like, you're there to, like, it's not like you're sitting next to your buddy and going, hey, we're going to drink a tasting mat of tequilas. Like, it is a job. You were there to, as you said, scientifically, like, judge every single spirit on that thing. So it is like in the mouth, spit it out. And they're like, oh, that seems really weird that you just wouldn't drink it. I'm like, you're gonna do 50 spirits in like 3 hours. Like, you're not swallowing at all.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and I'm not saying like the drinks are bad, but it's not like an enjoyable experience either, because you're so locked in, you're really breaking it apart, whether it's a cocktail or a spirit. I mean, you're looking at every single thing. So it's not like you're having, I hate to say like you're not having fun, because don't get me wrong, you're having a good time, but it's not like, again, it's not a social like party fun. It's like, I'm having fun because I enjoy this and this is what I love to do.
So how do you find balance behind the bar? Like you said, you're still working 2 nights a week behind a bar. Like, how do you find balance for health and mental health and all that sort of stuff between working late nights, early mornings, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's not easy. And I don't want to say I struggle with it, but I'm very cognizant of it. And so for me, like, on the night, I work Fridays and Saturdays at ESOD. And so what I'll do is, when I get out, I go straight home. And sometimes I do have like that FOMO, because some of my coworkers are like, they're going to go out, and I tell them, I say, guys, I wish I could, I gotta go. And it has nothing to do with sobriety. It really does just wanting to go home and go to sleep. And so I will go home and I try to get into bed like immediately, chug a glass of water and get into bed. And then I always set my alarm. I mean, I do this every day, but I set my alarm for 7 hours of sleep every day. That seems to be my sweet spot. If I get 8, I kind of feel groggy and don't feel right all day. And if I get 6, then it's definitely an extra coffee for the day for sure. So I try to find like that sweet spot of 7 hours. And then as soon as my alarm goes off, I'm up. And the first thing I do is work out. And again, I mean, I'm not big by any means, but, dumbbells for, 45 minutes on a different body part every day. And it's become a regimen. And I always say, like, it's really funny because I don't know enough about it scientifically to know about like the mental part of addiction, and to say that we all, like, people who have addictive personalities are, they or not, that kind of, like, the science on it I don't know enough about, but I can say from personal experience I am 100% addictive personality. And so for me, I took alcohol out. I needed something else to go in its place. And so for me, for a long time, and still to this day, reading has become an addiction where, and I try to keep it fresh. So it's like self-help book about something, then, a fiction book, then, something about history. So I try to keep it as interesting as I can, so I'm not burning out on one topic, but that has become an addiction. And the same thing with working out in the morning. Now, I've probably been doing it for like a solid 2 years of just every morning doing something. And again, I'm not lifting heavy stuff, but just progressing and taking notes and watching it, as I progress. And it's nice because I feel like I'm like, wow, my weights are moving up, my reps are moving up. Like, I feel like I'm, improving health wise. And at the same time, it's like a nice morning ritual that I do. I do that, I have breakfast, and then I'm gone. And so whether, whatever that looks like for my day, but it's just like my ritual every single morning is that. And it's, like I said, it's a nice addiction that I feel good about.
Yeah, addictive personalities in the hospitality industry, I think, is something that just tends to lead it. Like, I think as a hospitality industry people, we're addicted to like busy Friday nights. We're addicted to like the adrenaline rush. We're addicted. Like, there's so much addictive personalities in the industry just based around what we do for, like, no one else gets a high off doing a Friday night when you're like white out on chits and like 6 deep at the bar. Like, I completely agree on that one.
Yeah.
So with brand advocacy, you were mentioning that's what Continuous Beverage is all about. Are you finding a lot of alcoholic, like, obviously non-alcoholic brands should be definitely hitting you up? Like, for me at my bar, we've got a really good non-alcoholic list, and we bring in a huge amount of non-alcoholic products that are very expensive here in Canada. I suppose they're expensive everywhere. Some of them, like the Free Spirits bourbon, is more expensive here in Canada than the bourbon that I have in the well, like the actual alcoholic version of bourbon in the well. And we make like a paper plane variation on that. Do you think that for brand advocacy for you, outside of non-alcoholic products, you think there's a lot of alcoholic brands that are starting to see this sobriety and seeing, oh, how do we fit into this? Because I know for me personally, this year alone, we're like 37 to 40% up on non-alcoholic cocktail sales, 2% down on liquor sales. And so that movement's definitely here. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. I think Gen Z is definitely pushing the generational drinking. I did a little podcast about it recently. Do you think alcoholic brands are now going, okay, how do we fit into this new direction and demographic?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we could do a podcast on that little blurb you just had, because there's so much to unpack there. So I think it's really interesting about the conversation about the alcohol prices. I posted something on LinkedIn maybe like 2 weeks ago. And
I saw that. Yeah.
Because my social media is so pathetic. Like, it's just awful, and I know that. And I'm, like I said, I'm trying at 45, picking this up is like weird. But I'm like trying to understand social media, right? So I'm posting on LinkedIn, and like my impressions are, to be very transparent, it's like 100, 150, 200. So I post this thing about the price of a Tanqueray gimlet and a Seedlip gimlet.
Yeah.
I had 22,000 impressions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, like what's happening right now? And the comments were really interesting, because some people were all about it and some people were like not about it. And so it's such an interesting conversation, because I was getting into it with multiple people. And here's where I kind of came to this like thought. Nobody blinks an eye about paying a couple bucks extra for an organic steak at the market than they do for a non-organic steak. We all just we do it, right? Like not everybody, but most of us are like, oh, I want the organic one, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, we feel there's a value to spending money on poison, because that's what alcohol is, right? No matter how you cut it, alcohol is a poison. we are okay with spending more money on that than we value a product that's the same result, where you're drinking beverage that you enjoy in a place you enjoy with people you enjoy. That shouldn't be the same price, which is a very strange psychology that I would love to keep unpacking with people. Because for me, when I go to a restaurant, right, if I order a non-alcoholic cocktail, I am not ordering that because I'm bargain shopping. I'm not like, well, this is going to be $4 cheaper than the cocktail with alcohol in it, so that's why I'll order it. And I don't think Gen Z or millennials or anyone who chooses to drink non-alcoholic drinks, I don't think anyone's doing it for that reason. This is not a, can I get a couple bucks off my check? This is to feel included in a process of going out to a bar and having something in your hand instead of having your hands in your freaking pockets. Or to have something with your food that amplifies the flavors or works better and makes the food or the drink a more enjoyable experience. That's why everyone likes food and wine, because it makes the experience of eating that food better. So I just find this whole conversation about the price of things really, really fascinating. And I think that there's a lot of education to be done about why it costs the same. Because I don't think at the end of the day, I think people don't understand why. And the ignorance of that is what pushes back, where people are like, it's flavored water, and they don't understand all of the costs that come into making it. And I think when the education level of that catches up, people won't have such a pushback on it. I think that's what a lot of this is. Anyway, getting back to your question. I think that alcoholic brands who are smart and savvy will understand the value of low ABV, because low ABV is the bridge, right? So if I can go out, not me personally, but if the royal we, right, Big Lebowski, if we can go out and we can have an experience where we have a cocktail that is half the strength of a normal alcoholic cocktail, that helps again align with a more healthier vision of what you want to have drink wise, right? So there are always going to be people who want to go out and have a vodka martini, aka 3.5 ounces of vodka shaken in a glass. There are always going to be those people, right?
Yeah.
But there are also people who want to have a drink and not get intoxicated. And they want to have a good drink. So, but they don't want to have a non-alcoholic drink. They want to have something with alcohol in it. So for brands to be able to position themselves as saying, this is what we're doing, and we're supporting this because we want you to be able to have a cocktail or two and have no sort of impairment effects or things like that. I think that's the savvy move for them. And I know with like Fords, I was using them as an example earlier. Both of the drinks that were featuring Fords were both low ABV. And the guys that were there, I mean, you know them, like Tim Cooper and all them, they were all into it. And they were like, this is so great. Because again, it's the value. For me, the value isn't, I mean, I'm not 21 years old anymore. The value is not like, let's go out and get absolutely hammered. It's, I want to go out and have a good cocktail. And so if I'm having a good cocktail and it's low ABV and I don't notice the difference, like a 50-50 martini to me is a better cocktail than vodka shaken in a glass.
Yeah.
It's a better drink. So again, the value for me is for brands to get more into this low ABV space where you can use either lower alcohol levels in the cocktail. So instead of putting 3.5 ounces of gin, you do 1.5 ounces and 1.5 ounces of a really high level vermouth. It's a better drink. So for me, there's a value there. And again, I get all of the business stuff, right? Like you want to move cases, and a low ABV drink means you're not pushing as much in a glass. But I think I just argue that the psychology of it is, if I have one, gin martini at 3.5 ounces of straight gin or 3 ounces, whatever ratio it is, I'm only going to have one. If I have a really good low ABV drink, I'm going to probably have two. And guess what? Same amount of alcohol just got pushed out of that bar. So I push back on the idea of, low ABV drinks won't move cases. I think that that's just a false fact. We have a low ABV Negroni at Isodi, and that's our highest selling drink at lunch.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that this is here to stay. Like, I don't think this is going to change. And as I said, the figures that I've been looking at, I'm just like, that we've always put a fair bit of effort into our non-alcoholic cocktails like 2 years ago. And then this last couple of years, I know one of my bartenders went to Portland Cocktail Week last year, and he had a non-alcoholic milk punch. So we have a non-alcoholic milk punch on the menu, and we put a lot of effort into it now because inclusivity is a big thing, but just the numbers that are screaming, like with Gen Z, like the way that they're drinking, I think if you don't adapt, you're gonna die. Like the whole business behind, oh, I need to move cases, that's great, but if no one's drinking, you're not moving cases anyway. So how do you adapt to make sure you're at least moving something? But I find that I find the hardest thing, personally, this is something that I sort of talked about, like when you open up a cocktail bar or cocktail joint, you can have a plethora of stuff on the back bar to make alcoholic cocktails. I'm finding the only hurdle right now is that with so much non-alcoholic selection on whether it be beer, wine, spirits, everything, you can have a non-alcoholic gin and tonic at home, it's hard to stock everything for everybody, and then that pushes the general consumer to drink at home because they can go to the local grocery store and pick up the particular beer that they like. So like we have a really great non-alcoholic beer, but it may not be the non-alcoholic beer that you like, or the non-alcoholic seltzer, the seltzer that you like, or that, so on and so forth. So trying to cater to non-alcoholic market as it grows, I'm finding it may be a bit of a hurdle just with being able to stock the selection.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there, and I think you have a great point. Of course, I'll push back and say that there are a gajillion gins, and we've always had to figure out a way to get them on the shelf. So
that's fair.
But I know, Shawn, I agree with you completely that there's only so much shelf space, and coming from New York, I mean that the shelf space is tiny, and the storage space is tiny. So you do have to find the balance. And I think that's just with time. I think we will all get to a place where, like for me, vision wise, right? Like if you think about a bar like the Dead Rabbit that has a book of cocktails, right? A book. So how do they have the space for all of that? They're savvy about it. They're educated and they know how to do it and they figured it out. So if they can figure out how to have an encyclopedia of cocktails in such a small space, then somehow we'll figure out how to have enough of the products that people want alcohol-wise and also have enough of the non-alcoholics. I don't think that you need to have, 6 non-alcoholic gins. I think you need to have the one that you, as a buyer of that space, feels is the best one. Or you need to have one that fits your cocktail, right? So, for example, like I love Ritual's non-alcoholic gin for drinks that have like an herbaceous quality because I find it's already in there, right? Like I get like that kind of minty herbaceousness from that one. But if I was making a Negroni, I might go with Liars over Ritual. And that's what we all do with cocktails all the time, right? We decide the best spirit for that drink. So I think it's both. I think it's having an option for things, and again, for people who don't drink or who want to have low ABV, having the stuff on the bar, but not going nuts with it, just like we do with, again, there's a gajillion gins, and you've been around long enough, like I have, to remember when there was like 6 gins.
Yeah, when absolutely was top shelf.
There's a gajillion of them, and we're all still selective of which ones get that shelf space.
That's a good point. How do you tackle non-alcoholic cocktail development? Because you've got a couple of, like, I find a lot of the modifiers now have got a good amount of added sugar or textural elements to them, which is a lot better than it was, again, 5 years ago when it was just like, it is very thin. And we are getting away from non-alcoholic cocktails 5 years ago or 10 years ago being like juice, like citrus, sweetener, soda, tall glass, done. How do you tackle cocktail development now with as many brands there are on the market?
Yeah, I remember back in the day when I started not drinking and having to ask bartenders, being like, hey, can I have a tonic water with a lime, not in a pint glass, please? And I'd get like that look and I'd be like, just not in a pint glass, please. Like, because it's like you could pretty much put a sign over my head that says not drinking tonight if I'm walking around with a pint glass. So those days of like the pineapple, cranberry, grapefruit pour into the glass and with like a lime, those days are over, thank God. And I remember the other thing that thank God is over is I would go into bars all the time and people would be like, do you want to try my homemade tonic? And I'd be like, not particularly, no. It's such an awkward conversation, right? So I would say that the day, like I said, the days of those non-alcoholic kind of like drinks are over. But I do find that It's really exciting. The world of creating non-alcoholic drinks is hard. Like you said, you have to figure out how to trick, like not trick, but like recreate a richness that alcohol brings to
Mm.
cocktails that a lot of those non-alcoholic spirits don't have. So I do find myself playing around with different ways to sweeten up a drink. And, Liars for me is like the leader as far as the modifier world. Like there's so many good ones. And again, that's the thing. They're good. Like their coffee is good. Their amaretto is good. Their orange, sort of like curacao, is good. And so it's so exciting where I'm like, oh, I don't have to just pour you like seedlip and lemon juice and syrup. Like I can put seedlip in the drink and all of a sudden add a Liar's product. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I'm making cocktails again, because where we all started, right? We all started by learning how to like make a really balanced daiquiri. And then all of a sudden we were like, wait a minute, like we can do more here. And so now you start split basing those rums and all of a sudden you're putting another modifier in there and the drink just gets massively more complex. And so how many times can you use the same lemon juice simple syrup into a cocktail that's non-alcoholic where people are like, okay, I get it. So I'm really excited about the idea of modifiers coming out. And then also like you think about the different herbs and the different, teas, and there's so many ways to like create more complexity in the cocktails. But it's really funny because I feel like after all these years, if you were like, hey, make me your spin on a gimlet, like I could literally do it with one arm, my eyes closed, one arm behind my back and my leg, up for fun. Like it's so mindless for all of us now. And all of a sudden you try to do it with non-alc, it's hard. And so it's exciting because you're like, oh my God, like a challenge finally. And so like I'm about to send in my submission for Derek Brown and the Mindful Drinking Fest. They have a no fun cocktail competition. It took me longer to make this drink than it's taken me to make a cocktail in forever. Probably since World Class, where I had to like overly conceptualize and like try every possible scenario of like, quarter ounce here, teaspoon here. And I'm like, I'm doing it again. And it's like, it's a little inspiring where I'm like excited to make this drink again.
So with mental health being such a massive talking point, do you find that your direction with Continuous is very tied in with the mental health of the industry? And again, I do agree with you. I think the industry is much more open to chatting about these sort of things. Like I've always been open about my mental health, and that sort of came out of the fact that there's been a number of times when I've had like really rough patches, and I keep it to myself. And I'm a personal person outside of my business side of things. Like people think that I'm very out there because of my social media, but like there's a lot of personal things that I keep to myself. And I've reached out to friends and I'm like, hey, I'm in a bad place. I'd love to chat if you're offering. They're like, oh no, you're Shawn Soole. Like why do I need it? Like you don't need me. Like come on, man. You're the guy. You're the guy that inspires us. And so I've been more open about my mental health. Like I'm telling buddies, go get a therapist. Like go talk to someone. You need to. Like I've got a therapist. I take medication. I'm completely open about it.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that direction of Continuous is definitely combining the sobriety and the mental health conversations?
Yeah, I mean, knock on wood that this all goes the way I envision it, right? So what I envision is that not just the industry, but the world as a whole just keeps getting better about being okay with being not okay, right? Like I think that we're really going in a good direction, and it's really like it's exciting, and I am not one for I guess at my age, I get like, you get rigid, right? Like you get kind of set in your ways. So when like trends come out, a lot of times I'm like rolling my eyes and I'm like, oh my God, like stop it. Like stop it with your viral stuff. Like I don't understand viral, right? I don't understand. Like I just don't get
come
it.
on, come on, we're the same age. You can't make me feel old.
Well, no, but it's like I said, you just get rigid and you get stuck in your ways. And you've been, again, you have a podcast, right? Like there are parts of everyone where we take on a little bit something where, we're early adapters in certain areas and we're not in other areas. And social media is definitely not my early adapter thing for sure. So anyway, to me, the idea behind like that again, that whole thing of like everyone deserves a seat at the bar is that I don't want it to be where I'm like trying to preach to our industry, because I think it's bigger than that. It's about also educating people in corporations who go to corporate functions. Like I've had this conversation with multiple people at work or outside where they have nothing to do with the beverage industry. And they're like, I feel the same way. I go out to an event with my company and I feel like I have to have a drink. I feel weird if I don't. And they're like forced to have alcohol. And that's just like that's not the place that I want to see us all to be in. I want to help educate everyone in that you should be able to just not have a conversation. So I'll give you a really quick example. With World Class, we went to a really cool bar restaurant for dinner the night before the competition started, all the judges. And we were at the table and we had an incredible meal. I mean, knocked it out of the park. It was like 5 courses. They catered to us and they like created like dishes for us. It was incredible. It was one of the best dinners I've had in a long time. However, when we sat down, in front of all of us was a cocktail menu right on the thing. It was like 8 drinks. They all were beautiful drinks and none of them were non-alcoholic. And so, I'm looking at the menu and I'm like, all right, I'm out, but I'm so used to that I didn't think anything of it. So they go around, they start taking everyone's orders and they get to me and the server says, Chris, we know that you don't drink. So we created a cocktail for you. We have something ready for you. It's going to be, I think you really enjoy it. And I said, thank you. And we'll start off with the hospitality and the intention of that was incredible. Like what a nice thing to do, right? The delivery of it was rough because all the other people at the table are hearing this conversation where it's, hey, Chris, you're special. We're going to make you a cocktail because you don't drink. And I'm so used to it that I didn't even think anything of it, but I did recognize that I was sort of like special or excluded from this process. To me, all they would have had to do was put it on the menu. I would have ordered it. We didn't have to have this conversation. I didn't have to get signaled out. And I'm not sure, but who knows? Maybe a judge or two at that table would have ordered it, either out of curiosity or just because they didn't feel like having a drink either.
Yeah.
But the social pressure of everyone ordering a cocktail at the table made them order it too. Like, I don't know that for a fact. Nobody said that to me, but I could imagine that was the case. So again, my thing is to educate and inspire people to make their own choice. And so if you don't want to have a drink, you shouldn't feel weird about not having a drink. And if you want to have a low ABV cocktail, you shouldn't feel weird about that. And if you want to have a full strength martini, you shouldn't feel weird about that. Like, we don't need to make anybody feel shame for how they want to handle drinking. We should just make everyone feel like they're just part of the group, right? And everyone's just kind of doing their thing and making their own choices. And women don't have to be constantly pressured into that, like, are you pregnant question because they're not having a drink. Like just everybody just, I don't want to say mind your own business, but like if the menus are inclusive and we educate people to understand that this is a thing, then I don't think it's becomes such a weird thing anymore. I think it just becomes the norm. And just like growth in the industry, like I remember back in 2017 not having any options. Now, when I go out to most cocktail bars, they have an option or two. And what's cool is that now when I have them, I'm not shocked anymore that it doesn't taste like, what?
Yeah.
Like it used to be like, oh my God, this is good. And that was like shocking. Now it's like the norm when I go out to a cocktail bar and I have something and I'm like, I always say, like, for me, Megan Dorman has always been for me like the height of non-alcoholic cocktails, because I used to go to her all the time when I first sobered up. We would go out to her space and she would always make these drinks that were incredible. And I always hold that with her. Like, I always hold her in high esteem that her drinks were on the menu and they were so freaking good. And I could go out with the group after work and not have to have a conversation about it. I could just, I'll take that one. And nobody the whole group probably didn't even realize. They were just like, all right, he ordered that drink, whatever.
So what's the plan for the next 6 to 12 months for Continuous?
Oh my God. So, everything and anything. No, the idea, I would say the one mistake I've made so far, I try to, own up to mistakes. And I think the one mistake I made so far was that I launched in Q4. There's been so many conversations I've had with so many people in the industry and in the brand world. And all of them are like, Chris, we want to work with you. We're excited.
No budget.
I don't have any money. Call me on January 1st, So that was my first and hopefully only big mistake so far. But yeah, like the idea is, for me to continue to grow this thing, right? So it's having conversations with people and doing things like this where I can sort of A, get my name out there, and B, get this message out there, just try to be seen. That's part one. Part two is hosting events with brands and showing them and the people that come the ROI of these events. So my idea is that they don't have to be like, you and I have gone to enough cocktail events where it's kind of all about drinking. There's kind of it's networking and drinking, and that's kind of it. So combining fun activities that you don't have to necessarily have alcohol to do. So to sort of give you a reason, like if you're sober, like myself, it's nice to go have fun when it doesn't have to do with drinking, right? So that could be a million different things. It could be working out. It could be, creative things like writing or book clubs and paint and sips. I mean, there's a million activities that you can do, right? So combining that and then combining a form of education, whether it's a hands-on mixology or it's somebody talking about something, or like I'd love to get, a bunch of people in the room. I love speaking panels where you can get different perspectives from people, and having that combined with the non-alcoholic activity in no and low spaces that people sort of walk away saying, wow, I had a really good time, but I also really like the drinks I had. And I think that's my niche, because I've been to multiple sober events where the drinks are either canned RTDs, which I could just go to a store and get, or they're not good drinks, like really not good drinks. And so you leave with sort of a level of, I don't know, there's like a dissatisfaction there. And I've been to a million cocktail events where I said, wow, this was really fun, but I had to stand there with my hands in my pockets the whole time. So to get events where we, again, like that rooftop for me was the blueprint, right? Where everyone's kind of ordering how they want. There was both options. Nobody had to feel weird about it, and everybody could have a really nice time. And people did come up to me and say, like, I had such a good time because I was able to try stuff that I normally wouldn't try, and I got a chance to try them. And so for me, the ROI of the brand is important too. Because after you win Diageo World Class, you work sort of in brand education world, right? Like go around and do educations on the brands in the portfolio. And then we would also judge. And it was sort of like, you were doing a little bit of brand advocacy work there. So I already sort of have an insight into why brands want to sponsor things and that they need an ROI. And it can't just be, where you see it and you leave, because I've done that a million times and I don't understand the value there. So again, trying to show like how you use the product to me is key. So I always say like my niche falls in the fact that I am not an influencer with 100,000 followers, right? There are people like, well, oh man, hopefully. No, but like they will come in, right? And they'll hold the product and they'll say, I just got the new iPhone and it's amazing. And that gets you to see it. But when the alcohol world, people will buy it and then they don't know what to do with it. So either pour it by itself, and let's face it, non-alcoholic spirits are not at a place yet where we can sip them neat and go, wow, that's really good. Maybe we'll get there, but we're not there yet. And so they need to be put with other ingredients as a vessel to give you a really good cocktail mixology, whatever you want to call it, experience. So the niche there is that I know how to make really good drinks in that world that the Instagrammer can't give you, because again, you just buy it and you don't know what to do with it. So you end up either having a bad experience with it, or it just sits on your shelf and collects dust. And non-alcoholics expire. So what are you going to do? You're going to just keep throwing them out. But at the same time, I'm also in that world of understanding the idea of events because I've been going to them for the past 25 years. So combining all of that knowledge together, that's the 12-month idea. So, getting more non-alcoholic, low ABV cocktails on menus, teaching people the value of this space for people in the industry monetarily wise, and why restaurants should have them on there. And then also holding events that give people outside of our industry, like corporate events and stuff like that, as well as, industry events, the understanding of the value of this too.
When we get off the thing in the back end, we should chat about social media and what you can do on social media about non-alcoholic spirits.
I would love it.
I can give you some tips.
Thank
so we're at the stage of the podcast where I give you the 5 deep questions. I give this to every guest. What is one lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
Oh man, there's so many. All right. So can I cheat? Can I give you 2?
You can give me two.
All right,
I'll allow you to be the first guest. Give me two.
One will be really quick. That's why I'm really struggling with picking, because they were so massively impactful. So one of them was when I was in the Cayman Islands the first year, and Tobin Ellis was one of the competitors there, and he was kind of hanging around or whatever. And I remember being like really drunk and really vociferous about one of the competitors, and it was Christian Delpesh. And I had never seen him before, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And I was going nuts. And he came over to me and he said, now this is back in 2001. He said, "Hey, rookie, sit down. You're not there yet." And it was like massively humbling. And I've kind of always taken that sort of like humbleness to my work since that day, where I said, I always kind of try to think like I'm not there yet and like be humble. And that like humility for me has always been like where I don't, tote that I'm like make the best cocktails in the world, that I am the best bartender in the world. Like when people always like, "Oh my God, you won world class," I'm like, "Yeah, it took me 4 years." Like that's the way I push back on that, trying to be humble about it, and not that I just walked in there and kicked butt and got in there on my first try. It took hard work. And so that was a really, really defining moment for me, because at that time I was just getting into the bar world. I was 20 years old. I thought I knew everything. I'm from Long Island, New York, which has an ego because we're the little brother to Manhattan. So I was just this ego-filled idiot kid. And he really put me in my place. And it was probably the first time that anyone really did that. And it was a valuable experience. I didn't feel like it that night, but I felt like it, as I look back on it, was a really valuable moment. But that was one. The other one I would say for me was sort of the impact of the industry as a whole has really kind of helped me shape who I am. And so in 2016, when I was building up the idea of winning this world-class competition, I reached out to a friend of mine who has won multiple competitions. And I said to him, I said, "Listen, like, how do I do this? Like, you do this all the time, how do I do this?" And he said, "Do you think you're the best person in that competition?" And I said, "No." And he hung up on me. And I thought we got disconnected. I thought we got disconnected. So I called him back and I said, "Hey, I think we got disconnected." He said, "We didn't get disconnected." And I said, he goes, "Are you the best person in the competition?" And I started to fumble and I was like, "Well, no, but," and he hung up on me again. And I kind of, at this point, I smiled, right? So I called him back up. I said, "All right, sure, I'm the best." And he said, "No, but you don't believe it." And he said, "You need to get to a place where you truly believe that you deserve to win." Mm-hmm. And that moment set me off on so many reading of different books and mindset training and motivational stuff and meditation and visualization. It set me off on a roller coaster that I still to this day am constantly addicted to reading about and learning about. And that was a monumental change because I was going through sobriety, was going through a divorce, and I was winning that competition all in about a year's worth of time. And I always say that moment, like sobriety, winning world class, divorce, introspection, understanding, mindset, it was like a second birth. And so I always say, like, this is kind of like my second life since 2015, 16 area. It's like everything before that. And it's like my BC, if you will, it starts again. And so these past almost 10 years have been a completely different life than the previous, 30 of them.
Wow. If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
Don't stop learning. Don't stop growing. Keep at it. Keep trying to be better every day. It's not, I'm not trying to sound like, a politician or like some BS statement. It's just like, we get such a small amount of time here, and our days are not guaranteed. And, people around us that we love, die every day, and you don't know. And so don't waste it. Keep whatever you do and whatever you love, keep working at it and growing at it and getting better at it. And don't accept good, don't accept good enough. Just keep being better and keep driving and pushing yourself.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you understood earlier in life?
Process. Yesterday I did a reel, my third ever. And I was talking about process because process is everything. And I think one of my biggest struggles in my life has always been that I am very impatient for the result, and I want everything to happen tomorrow, and I don't want to wait for it. And I think that's always been my mindset. And I'm trying to, at my age now, and we'll call it wisdom. I'm trying to understand that the value is the process. And World Class taught me that. And I preach it all the time to competitors. I say, listen, winning is like that. And you get your name called, you go up on stage, you smile for some pictures, you get an interview or whatever, and it's gone. Mm-hmm. But all of that learning over those 4 years for me was so much more valuable than that minute of winning. That mm-hmm. minute of winning was so fleeting. It was a great feeling, but it was so fleeting. And all that other stuff, that was the juice. And so the process, and again, it's easier to preach than do it. And so I wish I could just keep working on getting better at understanding the value of process.
How do you define success, and has your definition of it changed over time?
Oh, yeah. I think when I was younger, success was fame, money, recognition, and sort of external praise, versus now where I would say it's much more about finding happiness. And I don't know where I heard it. I could have read it. I could have seen it in a movie. I don't remember, but something stuck with me when I heard it. And that is that the meaning of happiness is where you get to a moment where you say, I don't want anything. And to think about that on a deep level is like, we all want, right? I want this, and this will be better. And when I get to this place, I'll be happy. And when I get this amount of money, I'll be happy. And when I get this tails plate, I'll be happy. It's constant. We all are striving and wanting more and more and more. But when you can get to a place where you can say, right now, at this particular second, I don't want anything. I'm happy. And so that's now my form of success. And part of creating this company is to have more flexibility, more time, to own my own schedule. Because as you know, when we're in the restaurant business, you work every holiday, you work every weekend, you don't get those times. And with my kids growing up, I lose the opportunity to see them do their things that they are finding that they love. And so I was so happy that just 2 weeks ago, after taking less time at the restaurant and building out this idea of this company, I had an opportunity to go see my daughter get awarded for being in a music honor society. And she said, I'm so glad you're here. And it was I got in my car and I got that, I wasn't crying, but I got that emotional moment where I was yeah, I'm doing the right thing here. This is good. This is right. And that's, for me, that's now my vision of success.
What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
It's really funny because I feel like after 25 years of doing this, I don't know what my legacy would be if I go tomorrow, what it is, probably a lot of people will be like, he's a pain in the ass. But, at the end of the day, I thought it was going to be that I took flair and mixology and said, you can do both. That was always a big thing for me, because I still do flair stuff. People are still silly enough to hire me for flair events. And at the same time, winning World Class, there was a lot of push that it was a flair guy who did this. And it opened that door for a lot of people that said, you don't have to do both. You can do both. You don't have to do one. You don't have to be separated. And then I remember getting called by the guys at Milk and Honey before they went in. It was before I was Attaboy. It was Milk and Honey they had 2 locations. And I remember getting called by Leo Thieberman's actual girlfriend. And she was like, these guys would love to do a working flair class. And I remember going into the space, teaching a few of them how to do working flair, being like, whoa, full circle moment for me.
Yeah.
It was really cool. But to answer your question, and I've been thinking about it a lot with this company and everything, is that I think somewhere down the line, public speaking, inspiration, coaching is what I'd like my legacy to be. I'd like to inspire people to, again, sort of question, sound like a 20-year-old, question authority. To sort of just question everything and sort of hope that they can say Chris was always questioning things and always saying, maybe it doesn't have to be this way, and I look at the people that I really aspire to be like, and I think of author like Simon Sinek, Will Gadar from his author and what he's doing with the hospitality stuff. And I think of David Goggins, for me, that's a hero of mine because he pushed back on what he was accepting and said, I'm going to do something else and we can all do better. And there's these people that I look up, they're inspiring to me. And they always say that the people that you are inspired by, it's because you have a little bit of that inside you. And so you see a reflection of yourself in them. And so that's kind of like, for the last few years, been my thing, is like those people that are inspiring me. I'm like, I want to inspire like them. I want to figure out a way to do that.
Wow, that was a hell of an episode. Well, I really appreciate your time, Chris. Like, I'm congratulations on the new company. I'll drop you an email. We'll chat about a social media strategy, because I think that
I'll take anything.
I don't think anyone's doing it, and I think that you underestimate how quickly you can build that out. But I just want to say thanks, man. Congratulations on your new journey and everything that you're working on. And thanks for being on the show.
Shawn, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, man. It's great to see you.